My father brought Karamdan into our home thinking he was an honorable and trustworthy man. There was a certain sparkle in his eyes whenever he looked at my father, a glint I once mistook for respect. But that sparkle wasn't pity or loyalty. It was lust. I didn't understand it then, but I would soon find out. On the night the storm struck, thunder roared across the sky, and I sat alone in my room, trembling with each crash. The electricity suddenly went out, plunging the house into complete darkness. I was terrified, but my fear of the dark had always been intense, and with every lightning flash, I screamed. Grabbing a flashlight, I aimed it toward the servants' quarters, where our old servant, Karamdan, lived. He was about 50 years old, tall and broad-shouldered. Despite his age, he looked strong and youthful. His beard and mustache were jet black, but his hair had been dyed white. For some reason, he liked to keep it that way. I hurried across the yard, my clothes soaking wet from the rain, and knocked on his door, once, twice, then repeatedly. The door opened suddenly, and there he stood, shirtless. I gasped and immediately lowered my gaze. "I'm so scared," I said in the shaky voice. "Please come with me. The power is out and I'm terrified. I hate the dark. And what if lightning strikes us?" He didn't respond immediately, but then turned back into his room, grabbed a shirt, and slipped it on. "Don't worry," he said calmly. "I'm with you." He walked ahead of me, leading the way back to the house. Once inside, he stood in the hallway and said with reassuring authority, "Madam, go and sleep peacefully in your room. I'll stay right here outside your door. I won't sleep until the power returns." But even as he spoke those comforting words, his eyes were scanning my body. They roamed from my wet face down my soaked clothes. My shirt clung tightly to my body because of the rain, and I became painfully aware of it. Still, I forced myself to stay composed. "Okay," I said nervously, stay right here. Don't go anywhere." "I won't," he replied. "Just rest easy." I turned and entered my room, closing the door behind me. I placed the flashlight on the side table and sat on the bed, hugging my knees. Another loud crash of thunder exploded above the house, shaking the windows. I screamed and panicked. Without thinking, I shouted, "Karamdan, come quickly, please." Almost immediately, the door burst open, and there he was again. "You're such a brave girl, but afraid of thunder and darkness?" he said, half smiling. Still trembling, I replied, Please sleep in my room tonight. Just for this night. I'm really scared." He looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "All right," he said. "You go lie on the bed. I'll stay in the corner. Don't worry." I turned around to go back to the bed while he walked toward the corner of the room to sit. But just as I reached the bed, I felt something move at my feet, a faint rustle, a crawling sensation. My heart stopped. There was something crawling in the darkness. In complete panic, I jumped back and screamed, throwing myself into Karamdan's arms without thinking. My whole body was shaking violently. I had never imagined my fear of storms and the dark would bring me to this point, clinging to the house servant like he was my only savior. I stayed in his arms for a few seconds longer than I should have, but in that moment, all I wanted was protection. His arms were large and warm, and I could feel the strength in them. I thought he'd gently pull away and reassure me, but instead, something changed. He didn't let go. Instead, he whispered, "Don't be scared, madam. I'm here to protect you." But his hand slid slowly across my back and then down my waist, stroking me gently. I froze. He added softly, "I've waited for this night for years. The night you would come to me yourself. The night you'd let me enter your room." I pulled back in horror, but he held me tighter. "I'll take away all your fears," he continued, his breath hot against my skin. "I'll make you forget the storm, the dark, everything. I'll drive you mad with passion." "No, let me go," I cried out, struggling in his arms like a trapped bird. "What are you doing? Leave me alone." But he didn't listen. He gripped me harder and started pulling me toward the bed, whispering feverishly, "Every time I looked at your innocent face, I would sigh. You always reminded me of what I couldn't have. But tonight, I'll remind you of who I am. I'll show you the real Karamdan." His hands reached for my collar, yanking at my clothes. He tried to tear my shirt, and I screamed louder than I ever had in my life. Then, like a miracle, someone grabbed him from behind and pulled him away with such force that he stumbled back. I scrambled away, tears pouring down my face, and in that same moment, the electricity flickered back on. And there he stood on my plane. My father. He had returned unexpectedly from his trip and arrived just in time. I ran to him, crying hysterically, and collapsed in his arms. But his eyes never left Karamdin, who was trying to flee. "You filthy animal," my father growled, chasing after him. "I brought you here thinking you'd protect my home, but you're nothing more than a predator." He tackled Karamdin and punched him hard again and again. "You dyed your hair white thinking you could fool me? You're still a beast beneath it." My father rained blows upon Karamdin as if each strike carried the weight of betrayal, fear, and fury. He shouted with every punch, "I trusted you, I treated you like family, and you dared to touch my daughter?" Karamdin tried to shield himself, muttering desperate apologies, but my father showed no mercy. He grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "You're a wolf, no matter how old you are, Shun, always hungry to pounce. You wore a mask of respect, but tonight I saw your real face." I remained curled in a corner of the room, wrapped in a blanket, still trembling, my hair wet and clinging to my face. I couldn't stop crying. The moment felt unreal, like I had stepped into a nightmare. My father finally let go of Karamdin and pulled out his phone. "I'll teach you a lesson," he growled as he called someone. "Yes, Officer Tariq, come immediately. I'm handing over a man who tried to violate my daughter. He's in my house right now." Karamdin looked shocked, perhaps thinking my father would never go that far. But my father wasn't just a parent that night. He was justice incarnate. Minutes later, police sirens echoed outside the house. The officers entered, and my father handed Karamdin over without hesitation. The police handcuffed him, and as they dragged him away, he turned and tried to speak. "Sir, please forgive me. I lost my mind. It was a mistake." My father didn't even look at him. As they shut the door, he turned back to me and knelt beside me, taking my face in his hands. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Forgive me, my daughter. I left you alone. I will never do that again." I cried even harder and hugged him tightly. His familiar scent, his strong embrace. It was all I needed to feel safe again. That night, after the chaos faded, he sat with me in my room. The lights were back on, but the shadows of what had happened still lingered. He wiped my tears and said, "No man will ever work in this house again. Not even the most respectable-looking ones. We live in a time where people wear masks, beards, soft voices, none of it means anything." I nodded, unable to speak, my voice lost in the aftermath of the trauma. He stayed with me the entire night, and deep in my heart I thanked God again and again that my father had returned at the right moment. 1 minute later, and things might have turned into a lifelong tragedy. The next morning, I woke up with puffy eyes and a dry throat. My father had already prepared breakfast and left it on my side table. He had barely slept himself. When I walked into the living room, he looked up immediately, his face still tight with concern. "You don't have to worry about anything anymore," he said gently. "I've spoken to the police. They're registering a formal case against Karamdin. He won't come near this house again." I nodded quietly, but inside, my emotions were a whirlwind. Fear, shame, confusion. Just days ago, Karamdin had seemed like any other old servant. Now, every memory of him made my skin crawl. My mind kept going back to the moment he touched me, the way he spoke to me, the tone of entitlement in his voice when he said he had been waiting for this night for years. I felt violated. Not physically, thanks to my father, but emotionally and mentally. A boundary had been crossed, a trust had been shattered. My father made one thing very clear: no man would ever be employed in our home again. Not a gardener, not a cook, not even a driver. "From now on, we'll hire only women," he said firmly, "and even they will be supervised." After breakfast, I walked out to the garden to breathe some fresh air. The breeze was cool, but it didn't calm the turmoil inside me. I kept wondering, how could I have let my guard down so easily? Why did I trust him enough to invite him into my room? But then I reminded myself I had been scared, desperately scared, and that fear had made me reach out to the only person nearby. How could I have known that the man who cooked our meals and cleaned our floors would one day try to destroy my peace? I sat on the garden bench and closed my eyes. Flashes of past days came to me. I remembered how impressed I was when I first saw him chopping tree branches in the backyard, how he worked with energy despite his age. I had even praised him once, saying, "You do every job so skillfully." And he had replied, "Madam, try me in anything. I'll never let you complain." Was he hinting at something back then? And what about the day I saw him outside my bathroom just after I had come out in a towel? His excuse had been weak. He wanted to know what I wanted for dinner, that too without knocking. I had warned him never to come near my room again. I should have seen the signs. But I didn't. Now, even my reflection in the mirror looked different to me. Not because something had happened, but because I had been seen by someone with vile intentions. The storm outside had passed, but the storm inside me had just begun. As the days passed, my fear didn't lessen. It shifted. I no longer feared thunder or lightning. I feared silence. The kind of silence that made you question your instincts. I replayed every detail in my mind again and again, trying to see if there was something I'd missed, some warning I should have caught. I remembered how Karamdin first entered our house. My father had said, "He's worked for my old friend for years. He's reliable, strong, a man you can count on." And he had seemed like that. Reliable. Strong. He never joked unnecessarily, never pried into personal matters. Always polite, always quiet, and perhaps that's what made him dangerous. He was hiding in plain sight. After the bathroom incident, when I found him outside the door without knocking, I had confronted him. "Don't you ever come near my room again. If you want something, knock and speak from outside." He had lowered his head and mumbled, "Yes, madam," then quickly left. I thought that would be the end of it. I even convinced myself it had been a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. Looking back now, I realized he had been testing boundaries from the beginning. Subtle looks, lingering stares, a comment too warm, a silence too long. Things I had dismissed as harmless because he was old, because he seemed respectful. I remembered one particular day. I was drinking coffee in the garden. He was cutting branches and trimming flower beds. I had complimented his work. "You do everything with great care, Karamdin." He smiled and replied, "Try me, madam. Not just with cleaning. I can do anything. I've been trained for it since the beginning. I'll never let you complain." His tone had been different that day. Soft, almost suggestive. But I had brushed it off, laughing to myself. Another memory flashed, when I came down the stairs and told him, "Bring me pasta today. I'm in the mood for it." He looked at me for a long time before replying, "As you wish, madam." But then he added something odd. "You're very beautiful. You remind me of my wife. She was young like you. Very pretty." I had turned and said sharply, "A young girl like me reminds you of your old wife? That's strange." He quickly responded, No, my second wife was also young, and my third, she was just your age. Beautiful, but she died on our wedding night." I'd stood there stunned. "She died on your wedding night? How?" He looked away and whispered, "She couldn't bear my intensity." Even then, I hadn't truly grasped the meaning, not until that stormy night. Not until he whispered in my ear, "I've been waiting for this night for years." Not until I felt the terror of his touch. The signs were all there, I just didn't want to believe them. Even after everything that had happened, my mind kept circling back to his words that day in the kitchen, words that now made my skin crawl. "I've been married 3 times, he had said casually while pulling a bag of pasta from the drawer. "My first wife died of cancer. My second ran off with her lover. The third, she was your age." a real beauty. I married her thinking I'd spend the rest of my life admiring her face. But she died on our wedding night. I had stood there stunned, unable to speak. My heart had raced in confusion and discomfort. She died on your wedding night, I'd asked. How? Did she have a disease? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned his face and sighed deeply, his expression distant. Then finally, without looking at me, he said, "She was young and innocent. I was burning with desire. When I poured my fire over her, she couldn't bear the intensity. I lost control." The words had left me speechless. My face had flushed red with shame. My ears burned from what I had heard. I wanted to disappear in that moment. Still, I had found the courage to reply coldly, "People like you always waste what's beyond their status. You had a precious gift, and you destroyed it." I turned and left this kitchen in disgust, but I could feel his eyes following me, burning into my back like fire. That evening, I sat in my room for a long time, hugging my knees, unable to understand what kind of man had been living under our roof. He had performed all his duties so well, cooked, cleaned, trimmed trees, fixed broken furniture. Yet behind all that, he had carried a history of destroyed lives and desires he couldn't control. My father had unknowingly placed a wolf in our home, and I, foolishly, had trusted him with my safety during a thunderstorm. The shame I felt wasn't because of anything that had happened physically. My father had saved me in time. The shame came from the trust I had extended and the realization that I had lowered my guard. Karamdin had masked himself perfectly. He dyed his hair white to look old. He used respectful language to seem noble. And he moved silently, calculating each step, waiting for the right moment to pounce. And the worst part? He had been waiting for that moment for years. He had watched me grow from a shy teenager into a young woman, and instead of protecting me like a father figure, he had nurtured a desire to ruin me. Now, every time I passed the mirror, I remembered his eyes, full of hunger and entitlement. Every compliment he had ever given me now felt like poison. The truth was undeniable now. He had never been a servant. He had always been a predator. After the incident, the atmosphere in the house changed entirely. My father became overprotective, never leaving me alone, even for a moment. The locks were changed, the servants' room was cleared out and bolted shut, and silence, thick, uneasy silence, hung in every corner. But the worst silence was inside me. I was no longer the same girl who smiled in the mirror, wrapped her hair in curls, and played music in her room while dancing freely. Something in me had died, a sense of innocence, a basic sense of safety. I was hyper-aware of every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every shadow moving past my door. At night, I couldn't sleep without the lights on. Every time thunder cracked, my heart raced like it had that night. I relived the scene again and again. My shaking hand opening the door, Karamdin entering, the flashlight falling, my scream, his hand on my waist. My father tried his best to act normal, but I could see the guilt in his eyes. He often sat in the garden alone, staring into space. I knew he blamed himself for trusting that man, for not warning me, for being away that night. But I didn't blame him, not even for a second. One afternoon, while he was having tea, I sat beside him quietly. After a while, he said, "You know, I thought he was respectable because of his age, because he was quiet, because he worked well. I never imagined—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "I know, Baba," I whispered. "It wasn't your fault." He nodded and looked away. "From now on, no man will enter this house. I'll never take chances again." I agreed. The world wasn't the same anymore. People weren't the same anymore. You couldn't judge anyone by their white hair or soft voice or old age. Danger no longer wore ragged clothes or spoke with harsh tones. Sometimes it wore slippers, served tea, and smiled politely. That evening, I was alone in my room again when the wind picked up. The windows rattled. Distant thunder rolled across the sky, and the power suddenly cut off. Panic instantly took over me. I clutched my bedsheet and jumped up from the bed. The darkness wrapped around me like a trap. The memories flooded back by that horrible night. I almost screamed again, but then reminded myself, He's not here anymore. You're safe. I picked up my phone and called my father. He answered on the first ring. What happened, my little girl? I started crying. Didn't I tell you not to go, Baba? The lights are out, the thunder is loud. I'm scared again, and you're not here. His voice softened, full of concern. It's okay, be strong. Call someone to stay near your door. Someone you trust. You're not alone, okay? But his words made my chest tighten because the only person I had once trusted had nearly destroyed me. After speaking with my father, I wiped my tears and tried to calm myself. He told me to call someone to stay near my door, someone I trusted. But who? There was no one left in the house except me. Then almost instinctively, I found myself opening the door and walking toward the front gate where the replacement guard now stayed. But as I reached for the latch, thunder cracked loudly once again, and I flinched. The wind howled through the corridor, making the house groan like a haunted ruin. Then an idea came to me. A foolish one, but I was desperate for comfort. What if I let someone sleep outside my door? Just like before? Not inside, just outside. I turned around, walked back to my room, and remembered how my father had said it was okay to ask for someone to be close. But there was no one left. No trusted woman, no relative nearby. And even though I knew better, my mind whispered, maybe if he were still here, I wouldn't be this scared. I shook my head, angry with myself. But the truth was, even after all that had happened, part of me still remembered how secure I felt in that brief moment when Karamdin had stood in the hallway saying, "Don't worry, I'm here." I sat back on my bed, clutching my knees. The wind howled again. A window banged open in another room, and I gasped. Panic clawed its way back up my throat. I stood up and paced, and then, without thinking, I walked toward the main door and opened it just a crack, as if checking. The courtyard was empty. The wind whipped through the trees. I whispered under my breath, "Why am I doing this? He's gone." But still, I left the door slightly ajar, a reflex, a mistake. I returned to my room and sat down. Then, like a cruel joke, the flashlight in my drawer flickered and died. The room was pitch dark. Another deafening thunderclap shook the windows. I couldn't breathe. I opened the door again and whispered into the darkness, "If anyone is there, please just stay outside my room. Just stay close." There was no answer. And yet seconds later, I heard a soft knock at my door. I opened it. There was no one, just the sound of the wind. I stepped out into the hall, heart pounding. And then I turned. The shadow was standing there. Tall, familiar, silent. Before I could scream, I was face to face with him. Karamdin. He smiled faintly and said, "It would have been better if you told me before. I would have come in from the beginning." My legs froze. My heart dropped. He had come back. The moment I saw Karamdin standing there, I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat. He was supposed to be gone, arrested, punished. Yet here he was back in my hallway like he had never left. I tried to speak, to scream, but the fear wrapped itself around my throat like a noose. Before I could retreat, he stepped forward and entered the room. "You're scared again," he said in that same calm, twisted voice. "It's okay. I'm here now. Just like you wanted." "No. Get out," I whispered, my voice trembling. But he didn't listen. He closed the door behind him. "You called me," he said. "You opened the door. This time, don't run, don't scream." I backed away until I hit the wall. My flashlight lay useless on the floor, the battery dead. The storm outside roared, echoing my panic. He kept walking toward me slowly, like a predator closing in on cornered prey. "I've waited for this moment again," he said. "That night you screamed. You resisted. But I know you felt something too." "Don't touch me," I shouted, finally, finding my voice. He reached for me. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a table lamp, and hurled it at him. It hit his shoulder and shattered, but he barely flinched. "You think that will stop me?" he snarled. I turned to run, but he lunged forward and caught my arm. No one's coming to save you now. I kicked and scratched, screamed at the top of my lungs. He dragged me toward the bed, just like last time. My feet scrambled against the floor. I twisted in his grip, sobbing, "Leave me alone, please!" He pushed me onto the mattress, one hand gripping my wrist, the other tugging at my shirt. "For too long," he hissed. "You've lived above me, looked down on me, treated me like a servant. Tonight, you'll understand what it's like to be powerless." Just then, in a moment I still thank God for, the front door burst open. A voice roared through the house. "Shanza!" It was my father. The power flickered back on and the hallway lit up just as he charged into my room. His eyes locked on the scene. Me, pinned to the bed, my shirt torn at the collar. Karamdin hovering over me like a monster. With a furious scream, my father tackled him. "I should have killed you the first time," he yelled, punching Karamdin in the face again and again. This time there was no hesitation. My father dragged him by the hair out of the room, shouting for help. "Call the police again," he roared. "He came back. This animal came back." I collapsed to the floor, gasping, crying, my voice gone. The nightmare had returned, but so had my father, and this time he wasn't letting go. I sat trembling on the floor, still unable to process what had just happened. My torn shirt clung to my skin, my tears ran freely, and my body refused to move. My father's shouts echoed through the house as he fought like a man possessed. He wasn't just defending his daughter, he was punishing a monster. Outside, neighbors gathered at the noise. The second police call had already been made. My father grabbed Karamdin, bloodied and restrained, and shoved him out the front door. "You betrayed me twice," he growled, gripping the servant by the collar. "This time, I'll make sure you never walk free again." When the police arrived, they didn't even ask questions. They had already arrested him once. This time, there was no chance for him to lie or beg. They put him in handcuffs again, tighter than before. One of the officers said, "He'll face serious charges. Attempted assault. Second offense. He'll rot behind bars now." I watched from the window, still curled up in a blanket. My father came back inside, his chest heaving with rage and relief. He didn't say anything. He just sat beside me and wrapped his arms around me tightly, as if afraid I'd disappear if he let go. "I'm sorry, my daughter," he whispered into my hair. "I failed to protect you once. I won't fail again." I clung to him like I had when I was a child. The storm outside had finally passed, but the storm inside me would take longer to quiet. In the following days, life began to return to a fragile rhythm. My father hired female staff only. No men were allowed beyond the main gate. He changed every lock in the house. My room was repainted, my bed replaced. Every item that reminded me of that night was removed. Slowly, he rebuilt the walls of my safety. I visited a therapist too. She told me it wasn't my fault. That fear, trust, and survival can create confusing choices. But none of them made me guilty. "He was the one who crossed the line," she said, "not you." For the first time in days, I felt a tear fall without shame. My father stood by me through every police hearing. When the judge gave Karamdin a multi-year sentence with no chance of bail, I saw a flicker of peace on my father's face. Justice had been served. Now, when it rains and thunder rumbles in the distance, I still flinch. But I also remind myself, I survived. I was protected, not by luck, but by love. A father's love that came charging through the storm just in time. And most importantly, I learned this truth. Evil doesn't always wear a villain's face. Sometimes it smiles, serves tea, and calls you madam. But light, too, can return in an instant, with the sound of a key in the door, a father's voice in the hallway, and justice knocking louder than fear ever could.